Welcome back, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas. Not as in every week, because today we have something special. We're filming in front of a live audience. We have our two special guests, Howard Holton and Paul Lewis. Hey, guys.
Hey there.
So traveling, I know that you're traveling. You're somewhere, Howard. Paul, you're back freezing like a popsicle?
I'm in Ottawa, in the luxurious Ottawa Hilton. No, obviously not. I'm in a Marriott.
We need Marriott to sponsor this episode. Sponsored by Marriott. Boy.
I'll be in the Ritz-Carlton in 2 days, so I'm looking forward to that. That should be a good adventure.
All right, so we got something a little different this week, as everyone can see. This week we have a live studio audience, and our format is a little different. Generally we prep a lot before we go into it. Only 30 seconds. This week we have no idea what the topic is, and so I'm traveling, and I brought a live studio audience with me. Our international viewers who were asked to come up with a topic for us to discuss this week. So with that, let's see what our topic's going to be.
Sure. So we discussed the question, what would be a nice question to ask you, and we came up with how do you initiate impact or manage change within an organization? What do you need for that?
How do you instate impact or manage change within an organization? Like, how do you get started kind of with knowing change is coming? How do you get started kind of enforcing change or getting change moving? Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. Do you think you understand the question, Paul? Do we need to phrase it a different way?
No, I think I understand. Is it an IT-centric question or just holistically change management?
I think it's a holistic kind of change management question.
Okay. All right, you start.
No, wait. Wait. You need to rant first.
All right, we need to transition too. That's right.
Yeah, we need to rant. So repeat the question again.
About this week. Oh God. All right. So I'm in a foreign country. I'm in the Netherlands, and this is not my first trip to the Netherlands. And in prior trips to the Netherlands, there's been a certain activity that's occurred that gets me just a touch agitated. Sometimes you ask a question and the answer that you get doesn't really answer the question. So you ask another question and that answer doesn't answer the question any better. And you do that for about 15 minutes. And then if you rant, you just say, well, I can take my shit and leave. And if you're Howard, you start hitting the desk. Yeah. We have a term for that. And I'm gonna turn and ask the live studio audience. Studio audience, what do we call that? Being Dutched.
Being Dutched.
Okay. They didn't on it. They didn't talk about it. They just all do it universally in the same damn way, as if it's their greatest export.
Right. But does that mean, are they effective in some circumstances and not effective in others?
Yeah, because in some circumstances, people throw their hands up and walk away.
I see. So it's a method to sweat people out. Is that what it's boiling down to? It's whoever's the last one standing gets to make the decision.
I think it encourages you to exhaustion. That's all I can
figure. So encourages you to exhaustion.
And so when Lance was first here, he said, stop it, you're Dutching me. And they're like, we don't know what that means. He says, you know what that means, even if you don't really know what that means. And then he explained it. And the funny part was he left for 2 weeks. And when him and I both came back, they were using it on each other.
Nice.
They said, stop Dutching me to each other. It was fantastic. It doesn't mean stop doing it. It just means now they're a little more cognizant of the fact that it's happening.
Right.
So did a guy invented that so he doesn't have to argue with his wife?
I'm not. Probably the other way around.
It sounds like a good political process. Now the three of us have
Yeah,
traveled.
but actually, the political process. Matter of fact, I was just watching the Canadians do that.
You mean the trucker convoy?
No, can the Minister of Finance please tell me how much the average price of a house has increased in Toronto or whatever it was? And it went on for 3.5 minutes. Then the minister said, the Minister of Finance would like to say that more jobs have been created during 2020 than at any other time. Okay, but can the minister tell me how much the price of housing has increased in Toronto in 2020? The minister would say that we've got housing affordability programs. Okay, but and it went on for 3 minutes. It was hilarious.
Right.
And it was hilarious because it wasn't my government. Really frustrating if that was my government. So I was really happy to see someone else's government was just as screwed up as my government is.
Well, some of that is because our parliamentary system, our politicians equal our bureaucrats, right? There's no distinction between those two. There's no legislative versus administrative branch. They are the same branch. And therefore, you can be both political and instructive at the same time, or at least attempt to. So it gets a little bit complex when we do sort of stand-up speeches at the parliament. And we've been to countries around the world, right? And we've seen different behaviors in different countries. So when we go to Japan, all three of us have sat there and waited for a team of Japanese people to make a decision amongst themselves before telling us. Or when we've gone to India, it's been so honest in a positive and negative way that there's total clarity in the room because they'll tell you exactly what they think, good, bad, or indifferent right in front of you, regardless of what level you are in the organization.
I mean, kind of.
Yeah.
If you don't think you get this.
But so there are unique communications in each country. So that's good.
So let me ask a question, guys. So looking at how some people do the session, we have just experienced in a couple of minutes how proudly Asian do it, how Indian do it. We got schooling how to be in Dutch. How do we really, from a technology standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, when we need to start looking at change? Change is something that some people thrive in. Like, I love a moving target, so I can be moving. Other people may not like it so much. So as leaders, from your background, from experience, how do you actually help a company to implement change and to start transforming everything?
So I like to travel with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire. And that's the most effective way to affect change. I mean, the best way to affect change, I think, is to understand why change is necessary. Right? Like so many of our podcasts, I think it comes back to start with why. Because if no one understands why you're going to change, why you need to change, why change is necessary, why the old way isn't going to continue to work, or in reality doesn't actually work, then no one's ever going to choose change over the old way. And the second you're out of the room, they're just going to go back to the old way.
Mm-hmm. Have you been more successful with a presumption of always change, or more successful with change for the sake of change? In other words, one could live by leading IT by saying, every year we're going to make different decisions, or you can lead by IT saying, we're going to make this decision this year, that decision next year.
I think that's an interesting question, right? My preference is to have a culture of change. Right. I'm not sure that directly answers the question, right? But
yeah, it means you're siding on one, in that you're open for a different way of life, regardless of the situation within IT all the time. You're open to shift if the wind requires you to shift, versus, predetermining when change is good for you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I'm much more changes culture than to answer your question. Yeah, it's much clearer. I'm comfortable with change, right? Especially because for me, change is driven by data more than anything else, right? Why do I need to change? I need to change because the data says I need to change. I need to change because reality, in the way that I measure it, says I have to change.
Right.
Right. And I just assume that I'm not doing it correctly at any given time, and therefore changes are kind of always necessary. So there's always room for improvement. There's always room for optimization. And I try not to get defensive about it.
Right.
Because it's not that I'm doing it wrong. If I made a decision at a time based on the best information I had at that time and then acted on it, then there's no reason to be defensive when the information changes. I now have better information, more up-to-date information, different information because the variables have changed. So then I just change, right? As long as I always make the best decision I can based on the information that's available to me, then that's what I'm doing. The decision isn't what I'm doing. The decision is the outcome of the action, which is to take the best information I have, analyze all of it, and make the best decision based on that. As those variables change, then so does the decision. And I don't get wrapped around, well, I don't want to do that because I made this decision. It was the right decision. Yeah, it was just the right decision at the time.
The only change program that I don't subscribe to is one where you're implementing change for the sake of change. Change is the outcome, not change is the reason. So I'll give you an obvious example. Us as technologists like the newest and greatest, the brightest, the shiniest, the amazingest. And even if I've already implemented new technology 6 months ago, if something new now comes up, then I want to download that new piece of software and use that instead, right? I don't like Terraform, I'm going to go to TerraGrunt. I don't like TerraGrunt, I'm going to use another IAC. I'm not going to use IAC anymore, I'm going to use RPC. And I'm just going to keep change, which creates havoc in any one particular product or software because I'm constantly changing the underlying automation or the underlying code. And it's just because you think this technology is slightly better, or I want to learn it, or I want to, it's shiny and therefore I want to implement change. That's the least effective change I want to implement within IT.
Yeah. I had at a place I worked before, I had a chief software architect that was his modus operandi. Right. You do the bi-weekly strategy meeting on what decisions were made for our software stack for the next 2 weeks, the next month, the next year, whatever the period was, right? Whatever the decision was. Well, last time I said we were going to use Salt. This week we're using Puppet. Well, last week I said we were using Puppet. We're using Ansible. Well, I said we were using Ansible, but no, we're switching to serverless. No, I said we were doing serverless, but it's just too much. We're back to VMs, but I'm changing our programming language, right? And it was continual. It was everything that the guy looked at. It was no, this is the new hotness, so this is what I'm going to change. And my response to that is generally do that on your own time.
Right.
The office isn't your home lab, right? The office isn't the place where you can play with that change. You want change at that rate, go buy a laptop, go buy a new car, I don't care, go get married again. Whatever the kind of changes that you need, just don't do it in the office, right? We need stability or we can't make progress. And so change needs to constantly have a focus of progress. And I would say, right, perfection is the enemy of progress. Change isn't, but perfection is. So if you're constantly changing to find perfection, you're never going to even get progress. So you probably should knock it the hell off.
And change has implications. Like for the most part, change is to create a positive effect, but it actually does have to be implemented, right? It does have to be communicated. It does stop doing something you were doing before and doing something new. It may in fact require new training and new skill sets and new team members. There is implications to making that change, even though the net effect might be positive to the organization. And if you don't understand what those implications might be and communicate how one needs to deal with those implications, then the change will be a failure.
Yeah, it's that J curve that you and I talked about so frequently, right? You cannot avoid J curve. So all change, when change occurs, dips down before coming back up. Right. You have to suffer through the J curve. You have to accept that it's there because the upside is so much greater. And when you're analyzing the change, if you don't see the upside of the J curve, don't do the change. It's a great way to pre-measure, to predict the value of the change. Because all change is going to dip. All change has a cost. All change is going to reduce production for some amount of time. But while it's reducing production, you should easily be able to look at it and go, well, if we do this successfully, this is what we can estimate as our outcome. And that is X% better than what we're doing today. And therefore it's worth this Y negative, right? For this amount of time. So it is something that is measurable. And it is something that is observable. And like I said, right, if the downside of the J curve is greater than the upside of the J curve, then don't do it.
Yep. I think one of the bigger challenges of leadership, and tell me if you have a story for this, is impacting how fast change can be implemented. Right. So I'll give you an example. So you're walking into a new organization, you're the new CIO, CTO, CISO, and you want to create either a new culture or a new process, or you want to implement software engineering, or you have a new cybersecurity domain you want to implement, and your existing team, your existing organization hasn't done it before. And it's going to change the minds and hearts of existing team members who either don't have that skill set or don't buy into the change to which you're recommending. And now you have a choice as a leader. How fast do I need this implemented? Do I cut the cord and implement it now and hope everybody keep up? Or do I bring everybody down sort of a story path to make sure that everybody's on board as we go through it, or somewhere in between? The control of the speed of change, I think, is the biggest leadership challenge.
Oh, I totally agree. And I won't use any current stories. I have a few, but I would say they haven't come to an end yet. So,
right.
So I'm going to off on them. But the reality is, right, we're in leadership because there are people to lead.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If what I decide is I'm just going to make the change and I'm going to use a third party to do it, because that's often how I end up having to do that, right? We're not implementers at our level. We're in command and control, not in implementation. Then I have to use someone to do the implementation. If my team doesn't understand why that needs to be done and doesn't come along and doesn't have the skills and can't do it, then I don't have a choice but to turn to a third party. I don't have a choice but to turn outside. And if I do that, then what I've done is I've left my team completely behind, and I'm going to have to work infinitely harder to bring them back in the fold,
Mm-hmm.
right? I may do irreparable damage to them simply by doing that, right? So I need to consider, how big is this change? How long is this change, right? And it's why, if I can, what I would prefer to do is bring in a consultant that doesn't execute, but rather trains. Right? And do kind of that mentor-mentee training where it doesn't feel like you're being left behind. It feels like you're being brought along.
Right. You're gonna have to repeat the question now.
So how do you deal with employees that are naturally against change, that won't change, that refuse to change, that, we've all had them, right? We talked about this a little bit yesterday. So Paul, how do you deal with employees that do that?
So fortunately, the change cycle includes a bunch of time that includes not change, which is helpful, right? So you're introducing a new practice to the organization. You've introduced that practice. Now you're at steady state. There will be types of people to which you will put in the steady state practice and types of people that you will put into the change practice, right? People that are focused on creating new technology, implementing new products, doing new things, introducing new technologies. But there's also a team of people that's implementing those products, that are rolling out to a variety of branches, that are ensuring that the plants are effectively using the technology as an example. So I kind of separate my teams between the steady state implementers of technology and the engineering new invention technology. And it's not that I don't create some overlap between the two, because one creates an outcome for the other, but there's value in ensuring that there's parts of your organization that aren't changing at the moment and parts of your organization that are constantly changing to keep up with that steady state growth. That's how I kind of divide and conquer that.
what do you do when the change is inevitable? As in, you know, the way we're doing this particular business is no longer going to happen. I don't have the ability, you know, there's no run the old way and run the new way. It is just the new way.
Certainly, if you have to affect change to everybody, especially to a steady state world, without champions in the steady state, you're not going to be effective. So if there's not somebody in the plant, in the operations, in the warehouse, in the inventory management, in the executive team who won't be the champions for this new way we're doing things, or new business model, or new customer journey, or new customer experience, then none of this change will be effective. But if you can grab 2, 3, 4 of those individuals and say, you are now not only going to represent the operations of the organization, but you're going to encourage the rest of the team members to accept and love these new changes. I don't think there's anything I can do as an IT leader or just a change leader to actually promote that change. You need those champions to be in many ways, the receiver of change, and then the communicator to the rest of the organization.
So, yeah, so I have a lead, follower, get out of the way kind of mentality. Lead, follower, get out of the way mentality, right? And your champions are your leaders, right? So you can champion the change, right? You can say, I fully embrace the change, I understand, and rah, rah, I'm gonna go, and I'm gonna pull along those who follow. Just team members, right? I can pull along those who follow. You can follow. Maybe I don't understand it, maybe I kind of do, maybe it seems like a lot of work, maybe it doesn't, but I'm gonna do it because the champions and my leadership are excited about it. So I'm just even if it's just, I see the winds of change and I don't have a way to fight against it. So I'm just going to go along because that's easier than fighting it. All right. So those are your first kind of 2. Then you have the get out of the ways, right? So I found it's very hard to be 100% successful, especially big change, right? Especially with organizations that have been doing it the same way for 30 years, find themselves in trouble and have to get out of trouble. You always, like, you might get 95% acceptance. You might get 80% acceptance. Depends on the size of the team, right? You got a 5-person team, 1 holdback, that's 80% acceptance. Eventually you get to the point where you have your get out of the ways, right? That's where I get. And then once I hit a get out of a way, the tone changes. I'm no longer trying to convince you to do it. I am telling you to do it, period. If you fail to do it next week, you are written up next week. The week after that, you get your second warning, and the week after that, you are fired. Right? You are exited from the building. Thank you very much. Please do not come back.
Right.
Right? At some point, you have to say, no, the change is not optional. Right? The ability for you to drift and claw back and erode morale and erode the value of the change, and you know, in many ways, you know, derail the change itself. If it's a team of 5 people, 1 person can derail the team.
Right.
At some point, I have to say, you just kind of gotta go. I'm sorry. Now, if your success rate is 20%, if you've got 1 person that's like, yes, I'm a leader, and 4 people that are like, no, I'm gonna get out of the way, or you probably have a problem with messaging, right?
Right. Or the change is too dramatic or too harsh, or you're going too quickly. That was kind of my speed question, was at what point do you determine that you're going too fast for the organization to receive it, or to accept it, or to, you know, any one of those other negative terms. Yeah.
At the same time, how do you know when you're going too slow? Like, what do you do when you, even then, what do you do if you know you're going too slow? Right?
Right.
What do you do when the organization's in the red zone and all of a sudden you're like, like this was a flashing yellow light when we started the project, but the change is taking so long, we're now in a flashing red zone. And if we don't do this, we're headed to a cliff.
Yeah. And you see a lot of that with sort of GRC projects, right? Cybersecurity or risk or compliance, audit, all those things. It is very easy to fall behind. It is very easy to not be prepared for an event because you didn't invest enough time, or you didn't implement enough technology, or, you know, the processes aren't in place to deal with the repercussions.
Or you just argued about it and argued about it and argued about it. And then what happened? GDPR went into effect. And now all of a sudden,
right.
We saw that with almost every single customer we had in the EU. They
Right.
argued.
You had 7 years to implement, but you thought about it the last year.
Well, and think about it in the last year. They just argued about it for the last year. And then it was like, oh, we're failing our audits. Oh yeah, what did you do? Well, we had some discussions. So what did you do? Well, we had some discussions. So what did you do? Nothing. Oh, all right. So we know why you're here.
So what if the change is driven not by internal customers, but by the industry or the market? And all of a sudden you get, oh, if I don't change, your company can be out of business, but your people are the one holding you down.
Well, but it's, I mean, I think ultimately it's the same change, right? I think an internal pressure for change and an external pressure from change is ultimately the same change, right? But the problem that you have in your case, Carlos, is you don't necessarily have anybody driving the change, willfully driving the change, right? Blockbuster is a great example. And that's even worse because, like, if I drive the change internally, the chances are pretty good I understand the value of the change. Whoever drives it internally likely understands the value of the change, right? They're pioneering something, they're championing for that value of change. But look at a company like Blockbuster, right? There was a better example and more recent, and I forgot who it was. But effectively, they didn't understand why customers would use Netflix to begin with. Right? They really didn't get that. They didn't understand what the driver was. So then all they did was see the kind of tactical components and went, oh, it's just flat fee rental. We'll just switch to flat fee rental and it will fix all of our problems. All of our problems will go away with flat fee rental. As though that was the beginning, middle, and end of the problem, right? And so when that change comes from outside, I would say the hard part is not only is your organization ready for change? And is that part of your culture? But do you understand the reason that you have to change? The true cause that you have to change, the real driver that caused that disruption in the industry. If you do, that's awesome, right? You can be Walmart, right? Walmart saw what Amazon did and went, I think we should probably do something, and developed a huge online sales thing, right? You could be Best Buy or the grocery store and go, well, COVID hit. I don't really have online for crap, so let's get that up and running. But also my stores are mini warehouses, so let's just treat them like warehouses and have customers do a curbside pickup, right? Grocery stores did that, Best Buy did that, a bunch of other retailers did that, right? Because they understood what the driver was. They at least understood what the constraints were well enough to manage the driver.
I think that's a great example of types of change. And I've always put types of change into kind of 3 big categories. Process change, experience change, and we'll call it the magical change, right? So I'll give you a process change is I currently do A, B, C, D, and E in that order. However, C isn't valid anymore, so I'm going to replace C with E, right? I'm changing a process. I'm changing the production line. I'm adding another machine. I'm doing something to force the day-to-day activities of individuals to do something different. That's the hardest change, right? What I find the easiest change is leave the experience the same. Sorry, leave the process the same, but change the experience. So Disney is a great example. The way I experience Disney parks hasn't changed since 1972, right? I park, I go through the gates, I pass by the mountain, I stand in a line for a ride, I take the ride, I get off the ride, I buy some souvenirs, I go have something to eat, I go to the next ride. The process hasn't changed at all, but the experience has changed. There's new rides I can go to. I see new things in the line before the ride. I have new food to possibly buy, but the process hasn't changed anyway. They haven't changed the paths to go to my ride. I still go to the ride in the same order I go to the same ride, which is great. The magic side of change is not a process and not experience, but it's everything that happens behind the scenes. So, you know, Disney again, Fast Pass, right? It used to be the ticket Fast Pass, which got me into the ride quicker. Now it's a Fast Pass on my phone, so I don't have to go to the ticket line. The process hasn't changed. The experience hasn't changed, but how I'm accessing that tool has changed. So it's really the process changes that are the most difficult to implement because I'm asking somebody to do something different. But if I avoid process change as much as I can, or at least leave it to the end and focus much more on experience or the magical change, I think this is where you get the wins. Because if they start to say, yes, I now like to go to Disney more because I have a more fun and interesting experience like I do at work, then great. I think that is a better implementation of this change. What do you think of that?
Everything you said, except the very last thing, which is Disneyland is like work.
Fair enough. I'm just saying, process-wise, right? I'm doing the same thing every day, and therefore, don't change that. Don't change the path to the ride. Just change the experience of the ride.
For sure, right? If we use a big digital disruptor in that thing, right? The process to interact with Amazon didn't change. I log into the site, I put my login in, I search for a product, I select it, right? The experience changed when they went from books to damn near everything. Right. The magic happened when they added Prime. Right. Because all of a sudden on the back end, if it said sold and shipped by Amazon, I got it in 2 days.
So now I can get it in under 2 hours. In Miami.
Same day pickup or same day delivery in 2 hours. Not bad.
Yeah, I've got some stuff. I think it's same day too. Yeah.
So looking at all this,
like 5 or 6 days, right? So some which I don't think is a better thing.
Let me get you a little bit into. I'm taking my glasses because this is a good topic.
You serious now?
Yeah. So, well, we have traveled and we have worked with companies implementing or helping them apply change. Sometimes the change doesn't come from us, like from, let's say, we are the ones that are providing a product, but the information, the coaching, the sharing of the exchange of information, sometimes is actually what triggers then the change in that company. As leaders, how valuable is that you get those insights from the bottom up, but also from the outside in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's critical that you get both of those, right? I think if you just drive change from the top down, you're ultimately going to lose, right? I would say middle out and outside in are the well, yeah. Like if you start at the manager level, if you start at the director level, you're able to touch so much more and get a much better pulse for what actually happens in an organization than if you start top down, right? Even things like KPIs, I don't think should be top down. I think they should be middle out, right? Start with teams of people and measure teams of people, and then combine teams of people, that team and another team that they touch into another KPI that says, hey, how well is the handoff between these two? Then how well is the handoff between these three, these four? And before long, you've measured the whole thing. And now I have one KPI that I can look at, but I know exactly how that KPI is rolled up, right? Versus just that one big KPI that measures the whole organization that then says, did I succeed or did I fail? And we lost. For our live studio audience isn't so live anymore. Studio audience.
I assume just their PC went like. I agree with you. I would say that the impetus for most change is simply this: dissatisfaction with the current state. And it's usually an individual who's dissatisfied. It's the CEO, it's the CTO, it's the CISO. It might even be individuals in the operations. But without a really determined, dissatisfied user or receiver of process, change is never implemented. And even if this dissatisfaction is from an external auditor saying, thou shalt change because you're doing something immoral or illegal or unconscionable, that's still somebody that has a dissatisfaction with your current state. Now, I mostly don't see that. I mostly see interact with executives, CTOs and CIOs who are saying, you know what, I think we can be better. I don't know necessarily how we can be better. I don't really know the roadmap to get to that point. But I know what I'm looking at is not as effective as what it was before in my history, or am I talking to my peers, or when I go and talk to Gartner and Forrester, right? What I'm seeing in front of me isn't ready for prime time. What can you do for me to help both assess where I am in my current state, validate my dissatisfaction, and then help me get over that edge, create that change program to say, what will it take for us to be, what I determine is good?
Well, that's a lot. But yeah, ultimately, I agree, right? I also think, I don't think you can ever successfully do change totally internally. Right? You have to want it internally. If you don't want to change, don't hire a consultant to help you figure out how to change. Right? Like, you just waste money. Don't bring anybody. If you don't want to change, just continue doing what you're doing until you reach the point where you determine change is required. Right. Because until then, you're just wasting your time, everybody else's time, and creating more frustration, and you're creating change with no actual outcome. Because you still have all of the stress and all of the strain that comes along with change. I have to do my old job, plus plan the change, plus figure out what it means, plus get everybody prepared to execute it, then not execute it, then start all over again. Because I'm not going to execute it, so why bother, right?
Right.
But I think, bring in voices. Voices are really valuable in change, right? Change doesn't happen, unless you're a company of two. Change doesn't happen just with two people in a room. Right. And validate that it makes logical sense. Hey, this is what we observe. This is what the data tells us, right? This is what we think we need to do to make this right. Does that make sense? Do you see the logic there? Does that kind of follow? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And God, figure out how to measure it.
Right. No, you're right. And if I were to merge both of our perspectives, or the last two perspectives together, I'd almost say that the dissatisfaction of current state needs to be communicated holistically first, right? To say, it can't just be me thinking this. I need you to bring you along this strategy to say, do you really think the day-to-day operations of you pushing these buttons actually is the most effective, right? Are others in the industry doing these kind of things? And if I can convince you that the answer is no, then I'm already one step closer to, great, let's implement some change to make that happen. And I might be able to turn the dial of the speed back to our original conversation. Can I go a little bit faster now that I've convinced you that you're not satisfied with the current state, right? And we can sort of bring you along that sort of path.
So before we close, Carlos, because I know we've run up against time, I do want to thank our live studio audience. Even though at some point they dropped off, I promise the people didn't vanish.
They're still there. They are still there.
So what do you guys think? Did your question get answered as well as we could do in 40 minutes?
Yes, we did. Yes. Yeah.
Well, Carlos?
It was awesome to have live audience. This was live, even though, so now I started on the bottom square, then I moved to the left square, then I'm on the top square. So that actually show how change happens. Sometimes you're on the bottom, sometimes you get to move to the side, then you end up on the top. So my friends, it's awesome to see you. Your leadership will continue to grow as you invest in your time, you're growing your team. So make sure that you, number one, you share this with all your teams. 2, subscribe. Click the subscribe button on all our platforms, and we'll see you on our next episode.